So good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the System Center Configuration Manager new release and first look webinar. So today's session is going to be talking around the new release that's just come out. My name is Steve Beaumont. I'm Product Development Director at Power On Platforms, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP within the System Center Cloud and Data Center arena. You can find me blogging on my personal blog on systemcenter.ninja, as well as alongside the rest of the team at Power On Platforms at poweronplatforms.com/news. You can also get hold of me on Twitter, where I generally tweet about everything that's related to System Center and private cloud in general. So just a quick bit of background. So for those that don't know, Configuration Manager has been around for quite some considerable time. So back even before I started in IT, we had SMS 1.2, otherwise known as Systems Management Server. Now that evolved through various different versions through to the 2003 release, and we had some very basic functionality around managing our estate in terms of inventory, a bit of software distribution, and we started to touch around patch management OS distribution. The version that everyone tended to become familiar with was the Config Manager 2007 release. That went through several iterations and brought in much more closer interaction with operating system deployment and software patching. Now, the Config Manager 2012 release was quite a big step up from previous versions. We had to do side-by-side migrations, and it brought in a lot more cohesive management of the desktop estate. And then with the interactions we got with the Intune connector for mobile device management, we started to see that holistic view of managing both on-premise and mobile device management from the cloud. This new release that has just come out is now Configuration Manager. It came out in the 8th of December, so it's very new, and this is what we're going to talk about today and discuss some of its new features and how it interacts with things like Windows 10 and helps management in that arena. So a lot of people may have expected it to have been called Configuration Manager 2016. However, that's not the case, and this is mainly because it's time to start thinking around how Configuration Manager will be delivered as a service product. So what I mean by this is we're going to start to see a lot more frequent updates of the system. It will be dynamically updated and kept very fresh and in line with a lot of the other different release features from things like Windows. So to this end, we'll see a naming convention in the lines of the year and the month of that version release appended to the name of Configuration Manager. So for example, the code for this latest release was finalized in November 2015. So we get the current release version of Configuration Manager 15.11. So if we see a release, for example, in March 2016, then we'll see a new version label of 16.03, and so on as we get new iterations of the core base product that will be installed fresh, or just to identify what version you're currently being moved up to. So like I say, this is about keeping pace with the different feature releases, primarily probably around Windows 10, because that's already out of the gate. We're getting a lot more features, and Windows 10 is generally being referred to being delivered as a service as well. So we'll no longer see years and years of turnarounds until we get major new feature enhancements. These will be delivered in branches and waves, and we need to make sure that the configuration management tool is also kept up to date and can actually deliver them features and the support for them features too. And it's not just about Windows as well. We obviously see different releases coming through for the iOS platform and Android for the mobile devices, phones and tablets, and it's how we can actually make sure that we integrate and be able to support them feature additions as well. So very much how Microsoft can develop the Intune cloud platform service, it's making sure that we can also make sure that we have the on-premise additions to support them features. And it keeps on going on, and it's the same for bug fixes. If something does happen and it needs to be fixed, we don't want to have to wait for either hot fix to go through all the passing and the testing delivered out. You have to then go and find it, make sure you're keeping up to date with it. Same cumulative updates. It's about making that a lot easier. We'll talk about how managing that infrastructure, keeping it fresh, is made a lot easier with this new release of Config Manager 15.11. And it's also about new features as well. So one thing that Microsoft always struggled around was taking that feedback from the community, from the users, understanding what was important, what areas were used, making sure the investment was in the right place. And it's making sure that they can now monitor that, look at the data that's coming back, and actually adapt their approach and their priorities according to what is important for the end users. So if you haven't tried it already, I really do recommend going and looking at the user voice site on from Microsoft for the Configuration Manager product. There you'll see lots of useful suggestions people have already done, put your own votes against them, or log your own requirements and try and get that promoted and voted up by the rest of the community. And Microsoft really do listen to the feedback on that site. They actively work on the top, usually 10 or so, to make sure that them features are heard, can they develop it and integrate it into the product lifecycle. So one of the reasons, or one of the things that makes it possible to keep this new version updated, is what we call the service connection point. So this replaces the Microsoft Intune connector that we'll see within the 2012 releases, the one that's used for going out and connecting up to just Intune on its own to bring back that mobile device management. And it's been brought in to both do that same function as well as enhance the capabilities. So we still have that connection point to the Intune, but it also starts to provide the management for on-premise mobile device management. And we'll talk about that in a little while. It also controls the upload of the usage data, or what we call data telemetry, to Microsoft, as well as downloading updates for your configuration manager infrastructure, both for the server-side infrastructure and your client infrastructure. So this is where Microsoft are making it a lot easier to keep the system up to date by actually delivering them updates for you and making sure they install in the background without interruption, and some of the things that we'll talk about on how you can control out the deployment, making sure it still has a level of control, but actually allowing the system to do a lot of that for you. So talking about that data telemetry, so one biggest change within Configuration Manager 15.11 is that the actual data telemetry upload is mandatory. So we require this, or Microsoft require this, to actually enable them to do this as a service approach. They need to start understanding what type of database schemas, collations that people are using, how many servers, how big they are, whether they made modifications to the database. So they have to have a level of information uploaded to them so they can do a lot of the checks in advance to make sure that they don't deliver updates that mess the systems up, or that they are delivering features on what people are actually using. So there's a couple of different levels. You have to choose at least one of them to allow this service to work, and that can range from basic through to the full. Now that link that's on the slides, that is actually very detailed information regarding what it is that's uploaded, what type of information is submitted, and it's all non-personally identifiable. It doesn't identify you as an organization or the users or devices that you're actually controlling or managing, and definitely not license accounts. But it's there and it's all visible, it's all publicly knowledgeable, and you can see and choose which level you are comfortable with uploading. So let's talk about some of the features that you'll see within Configuration Manager, this latest release. So we talk about full support for Windows 10, and this is probably the one that gets talked about the most because it's on people's forefront of mind of how they can actually start to adopt and manage this new release of Windows, and how it, as Windows, is done as a service. Now, similar to that, we're also likely to see a new release of Server 2016 and System Center at some point next year. And again, it's been able to rapidly update the Configuration Manager infrastructure to adapt and adopt them new changes as well. So it's not just about the new features that come in with the Windows versions. Obviously, as we get things like Threshold 2 or even Redstone, where it's going to have much newer features, and we want to be able to have the control for both enabling, managing them, doing compliance policies around them. But it's also about the deployment of Windows 10. So we get a couple of new features that we'll talk about around things like a new option for upgrade task sequences, as well as things around servicing rings. So servicing rings being that mechanism to actually start to look at the different branches that Windows is offered in, how we control them, how we target them, how we distribute them to our internal organization to allow us to both move quickly while provide stability for the areas that need it. We get this on-premise mobile device management support that I mentioned. Rather than having to upload data up to Microsoft's cloud, being able to actually manage mobile devices across both your internal Wi-Fi networks and your LANs, without using agent basis, and again without that upload of data or clients having to go directly to the internet to come back in again. And again, we get some more updates for the mobile device management, the MDM. So it's about bringing some of the features that we have within Config Manager in line with the Intune cloud-based service. So Config Manager 2012, the previous versions, had the ability to download extensions. So as Microsoft released them, they would enable some features, but there was always a bit of a lag behind it. So we see the accumulation of quite a few of the new features within Intune within this new release out the box, and then it should be kept up to date constantly throughout its life cycle. We get support for Windows Update for Business. So this is another service that Microsoft has to help around the Windows 10, how we manage that deployment and the validation of updates, doing the peer-to-peer distribution of them, and that's controlled through group policy. If you was already utilizing that or had plans to use that for some reason rather than just Configuration Manager, we can actually now set settings within Configuration Manager to detect that usage so that we're not reporting back unknown statuses for updates that Config Manager may not necessarily be aware of, so they can coexist side by side. We also start to see things like software update management for Office 365. So the whole click-to-run packages that were difficult to manage before, where clients either had to go directly out to the internet to download updates, or we had to manage and maintain multiple file shares. We can now start to deliver and manage through Configuration Manager with our Configuration Manager client deployment infrastructure or software update deployment infrastructure. We also get nice little things around things like bulk enrollment of Windows devices. So rather than having to enroll them one at a time or using individual accounts, we can now en masse enroll them and apply policy settings upon enrollment as well. Things like the security certificates we might utilize, Wi-Fi profile policies, to make it much more easier to deploy a lot of this stuff. So we also get a combined application catalog and software center. So previously, if you wanted to do self-servicing of applications, the user experience was a bit disjointed as they would get spun off into Internet Explorer and have a Silverlight based catalog to go and browse the catalog estate and then get thrown back to the software center to see the actual installation process. So I'll show this in a little while, but this is now all consolidated into the software center. And we also get client deployment monitoring for both production and pre-production, and I'll show that in a little while. But this is one of the areas where it was slightly scary to know that we'll get updates delivered down to our Config Manager infrastructure, but they've brought in that level of control so we can actually see how we deliver some of these new features out to our end user clients to limit the impact and be able to control the escalation through a testing phase and into production. So some of the other features before we go into some of the demos, we've got some support around Microsoft Azure now. So both support for deploying a mixture of the actual core infrastructure across both on-premise and Azure-based systems, as well as doing the monitoring of the clients in Azure. One of the features of this is we actually now detect the actual hypervisor type that our systems are running on. So we actually see flags, if it is in Azure, it actually gets marked automatically as Azure, which allows us to deliver collections and targeting on Azure machines versus maybe VMware or Hyper-V on-premise. There's some work done in the back-end infrastructure, general administration tasks that we had to perform manually before, such as like WSUS, keeping that database fresh, up to date. We now have optional things within Configuration Manager to help us, such as the WSUS cleanup task. Now this allows us to set an option where when an update is expired and we're not delivering it through Config Manager, it will actually go through and decline them in WSUS now to actually ease the processing load when clients previously would scan every update within WSUS. Now it does only scan the ones that are active and used. And again, around some of the stuff we'll talk about later with preferred management points, making sure that we limit the type of data that's going across the WANs, making sure that we very granularly decide which infrastructure the clients talk to, and the Windows PE peer cache. Now this is a cool one for me. It's all about, again, limiting the data that goes across our WAN and using some of the investments that we might have around branch cache technology and the way that we do software distribution, but now from the operating system deployment aspect. Another cool one that we'll see in a minute when I do some demos is around automatic deployment rules gaining multiple deployment types. So previously, ADRs were great for downloading and pre-staging software updates, but then we'd either have to manually start to work out which client groups we're going to deploy them to, working through different phases for the estate, or using community-based solutions such as either the Cortex solution for software update management, or one from ourselves at PowerOn that Raphael did that actually allows it to actually script that process or automate that process based on your needs. We also get some stuff around support for things like SQL Always On now, so this gives us a lot more high availability options rather than just relying on clustering, as well as the site scale being dramatically increased. So we can now handle a lot more clients per primary site, as well as overall within a hierarchy that is on a central administration site or CAS based, right up to the scale where if we have a big infrastructure, we can get just over 1 million devices. And by 1 million devices, I mean combination of Windows desktops, laptops, Mac devices, so the actual physical desktop Macs, as well as cloud hosted systems or even on-premise managed mobile device systems such as iOS and Android, etc. All in the mix, just over 1 million devices. So how do we actually get to this new version? So the good news is, for those people that have been keeping their infrastructures up to date, they have the latest service packs on, it's an in-place upgrade. If you're as far back as just the bare raw version of Config Manager 2012, so the RTM version released to manufacturing, then it will be a service pack upgrade first, and then you can in-place upgrade to Config Manager 1511. Now, the usual recommendation of this is you should usually be on the relevant latest service pack and the latest cumulative update before applying the update, but there's nothing to stop you from an official support perspective of just going as long as you are on at least service pack 1 or upwards straight to 1511. If you're still back on 2007, then fine, you have the same scenario as if you would migrate to 2012, and that is a side-by-side migration. Brand new infrastructure, set it up, configure it, and then use the migration tools within Configuration Manager to start pulling across your clients and your packages and your applications into your new infrastructure. If you're as far back as 2003, then I'm sorry, you're pretty much doomed. There is multiple hoops you could go through and you could do it, but if you're that far back, to be honest, you'd probably want to look at starting afresh. Now, while it's okay to do an in-place upgrade, you might want to take the stance just to step back a couple of times and look at how your general infrastructure, your hierarchy is designed. There could be quite a lot of opportunities here to remove things like multiple secondary sites, flatten your hierarchy, and just rely on things like a primary site server, especially if you don't have the scale for a CAS need. There's no need to go for a CAS unless you have scale. But you can also look at removing secondary sites and putting in distribution points, extra management points, and using some of the new features around preferred management points and distribution points to control that bandwidth allocation and WAN utilization. The good news is, once you do get to this new release, it's going to be a lot easier moving forward. So like I'll show you and talk about is that updates and servicing nodes that we discussed, and how that will help download the new updates and new features in the background and service the site for you and help you from an administration point of just progressing that through pre-production into production. So it's about time that I stop talking and just start to show you some of these features. So we're going to jump into a demo where we have a look at the console. So this is the new console. In fact, it looks exactly the same as 2012. So the learning curve for moving from 2012 to 1511 should be very minimal. It's more about just discovering where these new features sit and starting to utilize them and understanding how those new features work, rather than learning a completely new version of the product right from scratch again. So some of the things that we talked about, we've got things like, well, for a start, just to show you, I am currently on the 1511 version. But that data telemetry option, that lives up here in this little menu, and you get to choose which level that we want to actually submit to. You get the brief descriptions, but like I say, you can use the hyperlinks or that information in the previous slide that shows you a much more detailed view of exactly what gets analysed, what gets passed up, and how it's actually handled in terms of data retention, etc. So talking about compliance settings, you can see immediately we have a few more nodes within the consoles. So one of the main things is we have things that we see within Intune now, such as terms and conditions. So when people do join to the workplace, so using things like the enrollment aspects in Windows 10 or joining their phones and enrolling the phones, they'll be presented with a set of terms and conditions for your organization, depending on which type of users and stuff you advertise out to. So obviously I've not put a lot in here, but this would go along terms to say what your expectations are, what they can use their device for work purposes, etc. The other thing is things around Windows Edition upgrades. So this is actually a cool feature within Windows 10 itself. Previously, if you deployed out in a state of Windows 8.1 professional devices and then thought, well, actually we need to use some of the enterprise features now, you'd have to re-image them devices to bring them up to the enterprise SKU. Now we can simply use Configuration Manager to actually deploy out a product key and tell it what version we want to upgrade to, and it will just on the fly move that to the latest version. The really good thing is, I'm trying to use this as a reason to get one. You can even control things such as the holographic edition of Windows Enterprise when it comes out. So we get a lot of things around bulk enrollments, like I say, being able to set things now on devices such as the types of certificates that they have, Wi-Fi profiles, where we want them to enroll. And then we have things around the software updates I mentioned for automatic deployment rules. So previously, like I say, we would use that typically just to download it and get it pre-staged out. Now we can add the multiple deployment types. So this makes it a lot easier to say, well, fine, bring down the updates on a schedule. So this is my patch Tuesday, so run once a month on a Tuesday. But now we can say, well, actually, after 7 days, I want to start rolling out to my collection of test devices. Then we might want to say, well, actually, fine, I want to roll these out then an extra 14 days after that to then go out to my second wave of devices. So we can actually do that automated process now of download the patches and go through a series of steps on a limited number or an increasing number of devices to actually roll out our patches for that month. A very cool, easy implemented feature from Microsoft. I mentioned earlier about the client monitoring. So one of the features that we'll see under the client status now is rather than just the activity checks to see how healthy our clients are, but I can actually see the rollout of my estate. So I have it scheduled to automatically upgrade my client agents, and I've been spacing this out and said do it over a space of 7 days. So rather than it just going and upgrading every single client as quickly as it can, it uses its intelligence in the back end to roll that out gradually to make sure we don't swamp the environment, and also if there was any problems, we're not just going to kill it all just within a couple of days. So this has been running now for the past 3 or 4 days. You can see I've still only got 23 that have managed to be updated and 31 that are still in progress. So far not bad, I've only got 1 failure, but if I drill down into the compliant ones, you can see we get this nice list now. We get the status messages, we can see what versions they're currently on. Similarly with the one that's in progress, we can get to see what version they're currently on, when they're going to be scheduled and how it's actually going. So talking about that Azure support or the hypervisor level detection, this is my VM within Azure. It's my domain controller up in the cloud. And we can now see we have this set of properties that actually identifies that it is a machine that's running in Azure. Nothing to do from an administrative perspective. The new agent just discovers that for us and reports it back into the console. Again, it's there as inventory property, so we can actually do collections and stuff based around that. So I mentioned about that whole cloud servicing area. So underneath the cloud services now, gone is the Intune site role, and we have this new updates and servicing. Now obviously this release has only been out 10 days. There's no new updates or features yet. We'll wait and see when they come in, but they would start to appear within the console here, and we can start to see what's going to happen with them and start managing it moving forwards. And again with additional features that may get enabled. One of them things is going to be around the fact that we have that pre-production client agent. So when we do the client upgrade, not only can we choose when to space it out, For example, there's a blog post from Microsoft the other week that was talking about their internal upgrade process, doing their core infrastructure upgrade of their site servers over a weekend, and then spacing out their 300-odd thousand devices that they were upgrading over a 14-day period, I believe. So it just rolls over time, it doesn't swamp your network. And again, as we get them new features delivered, we'll see a pre-production, so a new release of the client. We can actually automate it to go to a pre-production collection. We choose what systems are either not critical or we want to test first, and it will stage that before we promote it into production, assuming everything's okay. And again, that roll period sits on one of the site servers, probably your primary site server, but it has these two modes. So we'd always recommend the online persistent connection, because this is how it's going to talk up to the cloud service. It's how it's going to upload your telemetry data, pass it to Microsoft. Same with the Intune. It's going to be able to do that discovery of any devices that enroll, be able to do password pin resets, device states, locks. If you was to, for example, use it in an offline connection, you might have scenarios where you might have air gap solutions, high security, where you cannot have it automatically talking to the internet. You will have a tool where you can go and download all the data that's required and go to another area that has internet access and upload that data. But you still have to do that. To gain access to all the new features, you'll have to make sure the telemetry data is uploaded, if even manually. And if you was using cloud-based mobile device management to be able to do a pin reset, you'd have to manually take the extract from the console and go manually upload it for it to do that pin reset, which is kind of defeating that object of the very quick turnaround of cloud management. That's why we do recommend having that online persistent connection. So obviously, I said earlier, one of the main draws is going to be around that operating system deployment. So I'm going to show you in a second where within the console that fits, the type of scenarios and stuff it enables, but it is about making a lot of the in-place upgrades a lot easier. Microsoft have got a strong focus on doing this. It might be that first step you take to get to Windows 10. You might do it as another re-image of the machine just to get that fresh start approach, or you could do an in-place upgrade from Windows 8, etc. But then moving forwards, the new releases of Windows 10 as a service, so the different branches, would be done much more as an in-place upgrade. We do require the Windows 10 ADK as a requirement, both for upgrade to 15.11, but also to support the deployment of the Windows 10. Good news is that doesn't limit you. You can still deploy back as far as Windows 7 using the Windows 10 ADK. Another good thing is the actual introduction of blocking or warnings for risky deployments. So some people may have heard in the news where certain banks got quite severely hit when they had a rollout of a task sequence to all of their servers and the client infrastructures that was basically a decommissioning task sequence that basically formatted a lot of their hard drives. You can imagine the displeasure as it went, I can see every single server, and now every single server has got a blank hard drive. So what Microsoft have done is brought in either the ability to directly block it or at least pop up a warning message to say things like, hang on a second, do you know that this collection's got more than 100 devices in it? Actually, do you know this has got server operating systems in? Are you really sure you want to be doing this? As well as a level of protection for the actual core config manager site infrastructure, so that even if you did accidentally flatten all your servers, you still have configuration manager up and running to be able to redeploy them again at a worst case scenario. And there's some enhancements around driver management as well. Things like making it easier to search and filter, as well as some intelligence around detecting if you're importing the wrong version or the bitness. So trying to import a 32-bit driver into a 64-bit boot image, for example. So let's have a look what this looks like within Config Manager again. So within the software library, we have the operating system nodes that we've always had. And within the task sequences area, we now have the option for a new type of task sequence. So this would be upgrade an operating system from an upgrade package. So this actually produces a much simpler task sequence that we can utilize. Obviously, you can customize it. But this brings in again some more intelligence around how it does the upgrades. Little things like making sure that the right amount of memory is present, and this one that I like, making sure that it is actually a client operating system that you're trying to upgrade. Again, another level of protection, because you don't want to be upgrading your servers to Windows 10, not unless maybe it was a Windows Server 2003 box where you might find some benefits, but that is joking. And some other things around handling how you would see if you manually run from the ISO files the Windows 10 upgrade, making sure that it does performing compatibility scans, making sure there is no applications that are potentially going to cause problems, making sure that you can go off and get any new updates right from the outset directly from Windows Update. And little things just generally make it easier to do an in-place upgrade. That is more targeted though around Windows 8 deployment upgrades to Windows 10. If you already have Windows 10 out there in the estate, how do you manage that going forwards? So we've heard a lot on news around about how Microsoft now treat Windows 10 as a service, and you'll see a lot in the press, etc., or knowledge about these what we call branches. So it's actually how we can handle things like the current branch, which will be the one that delivers all the new features as soon as they become available. The current branch for business, which kind of holds off a little bit and just delivers some incremental features but nothing earth-shatteringly changing. And then what we call the long-term servicing branch, which is very stable for a long period of time and only generally gets updated with security fixes and bug fixes rather than brand new features. So this is a complete change to the approach, and this is why we talk about rings. This is about trying to decide, well, actually, we might have certain parts of the organization that are very keen to see the new features. We might have sales parts of the organization where they want to have some of the new Cortana integration with things like LinkedIn or Uber, or we might have customer access points that need a very stable platform to make sure they can deliver line of business services, which will be more suited on something like the long-term servicing branch. So this new dashboard starts to show you the inventory of your estate. So you can see from ours with the amount of client upgrades we've got. So this is dependent on getting the new client agent out. We've only got 2 of our Windows 10 devices so far up onto the new client version, and both of them are on the 1507 release, which was the original RTM, or the first release of Windows 10 that went out, and it's also classed as the long-term servicing branch. How do I know that's classed as the long-term servicing branch? Well, the dashboard tells me. So it starts to show you within the console what versions are currently in release, which ones are ready for production. So we get an idea and a little bit of an overview as new versions come out, where they sit within our life cycle. It also gives us a monitoring aspect, so we can see who's part of which rings, which ones are currently upgrading, which ones are due to expire soon, which according to us is 100%, because I've said our estate has this new servicing plan that is based on the current branch. And as we can see, the current branch will be expiring very soon. So that this will be classed, the current branch is this one, the branch that we're on is the 1507, the current branch that we want to get to is the 1511, and the release ready ends at this point and then moves into the business ready, or the current branch for business. So that looks like a servicing plan such as this, where I've actually said, well, fine, my servicing plan will target all of my Windows 10 devices. So I've got everybody basically on the current branch. I might separate this down more and have some people on the long term, some people on the current branch for business, some people on this one. But I've also said I want to make sure I have the release ready current branch delayed by 30 days after Microsoft publish it. So although I like to be cutting edge, I don't like to be that cutting edge that Microsoft released something and the entire internet explodes complaining about different faults and bugs, and our business goes down because we've taken them on board straight away. So I'm putting in a little bit of a delay action before it starts to go out and automatically upgrade our endpoint clients for us, based on the similar things we used with all the config manager in terms of maintenance windows, deployment times, using the distribution points for scheduling, offline collection onto the devices. The other thing is, like I mentioned, is around the deployment warnings. So if I did want to push out this task sequence, if I go to deploy it, choose a collection, immediately I start to be told, hang on a second, this has a high risk activity. It can wipe computers. And what it's also saying is that it's going to hide any of my clients that are above the threshold I set. So I set a threshold that says if I have any collections that are above 100, hide them away from the console so I can't choose them, which has immediately removed things like my all systems collection. If I go to deploy it to my service collection, I should at some point get prompted, oops, if I make it a required deployment, it again will tell me this is a high risk and it's running against computers with a server operating system, and it has some of my config manager bits in there. Now I have my site only configured to warn me, otherwise this would completely block it, but I can override it as long as I accept it. And notice that it will run, but it will log an audit status message. So I have that level of accountability. I can't hide away and say it wasn't me, because the site server will record that it was me that performed this action. So going back to the slides, we talked about that deployment monitoring. So being able to actually see what we're upgrading. It obviously has time periods, so we can choose how long we want to spread the upgrades over. We could choose the different pre-production environments that we want to upgrade. So actually make sure that we control it in a controlled manner and choose when we want to push this out to the wider estate. So this will start to configure the servicing feature in general will start to keep our core infrastructure up to date in terms of the site servers, but this will also start to handle cumulative updates as full client upgrades. So we don't have to do what we did previously, which was create the packages during the install of cumulative updates and then create them advertisements or them deployments to choose where and when we want to deploy them. We can control it more granularly. We get the on-premise mobile device support. So initially this is going to be around Windows 10 and Windows 10 mobile devices. So this is using the built-in OMA direct management agents that are built into the operating systems, both for the inventory perspective, delivering applications and controlling the settings. So we don't need to install a configuration manager agent on the actual devices that we manage as a mobile device. It will still require a Microsoft Intune subscription, not to upload data to it and not to have clients going and talking to it, but just generally as a licensing mechanism. And also we hope to have more than Windows support in the future. Should hopefully start to see work around iOS, etc., but obviously that's not confirmed. But as well, when we talk about application deliveries, one feature that we've just seen recently released within Intune is actually being able to deliver out MSI packages to mobile device managed devices rather than config manager. We get that same feature and functionality within configuration manager using the on-premise MDM. Mentioned Windows PE cache earlier, so this is that idea of leveraging the branch cache features, but within that pre-boot environment when we're doing operating systems. So rather than having to go back to across the WAN to a full distribution point, or even having to place distribution points out on remote sites, it will now look for that content across devices that are in the full operating system with a config manager agent to actually get that from the local subnet. We can control this through client settings, so it's not a all or nothing setting. We can set it for different areas, and we can configure the task sequence to actually maintain that content on the local devices so we can reuse it. Again, preferred management points, again about limiting the amount of transfer across the WANs, making sure we have control over which site infrastructure clients talk to. It's done in essentially the same way that we have currently with distribution point assignment with boundary groups and locations. And you can configure this so clients will use a preferred MP, but if it's not there anymore, it will keep on going across to other ones, so you'll never have lack of communication. It's about being a preferred place to talk to. So in summary then, we're talking about the upgrade itself is going to be more of an in-place upgrade for most people. Even if it's a couple of in-place upgrades just to get the latest service pack on and then upgrade to this current branch. It's about getting these new features as they start to be developed, being able to be supported in line with the Windows releases or even the iOS releases, and make it a lot easier on the system administration side rather than having to keep your own eye on it, go to the various blog posts, download from the internet, from the hot fixes, scheduling the time to install it, do your testing. A lot of that should start to be handled for you, along with things like trying to work out the content distribution across WANs, just making it easier administration in general. The Windows 10 features on all the deployment scenarios that are currently available are now fully supported, so doing all these servicing rings, deciding when and where, what feature releases you want to be able to do with deployments and deployment deferments are now there, and keeping them new features as they do become available fresh within Config Manager and supportable. It's also that protection and that limiting of the human error element as well. Being able to make sure that we stop people accidentally doing stuff, either through lack of understanding or accidentally clicking here and everywhere. Just protects us as configuration managers, experts, and also from a business perspective of accidental damage to the estate. And again, we're getting that much greater scale and performance capabilities, as well as greater enterprise mobility integration, where we shouldn't have that lag anymore between the cloud-based services of Intune and the on-premise single pane of glass approach from Config Manager. So a couple of things to wrap up on. So obviously this video has been recorded. We will make it available online as soon as possible. And we'll also schedule in and rerun these events in early January, just either for people to refresh their memory or if they couldn't attend it, such as this afternoon. If anyone within your organisation couldn't do, please feel free to point out that, again, this will be a rerun session within January. We're also going to be doing some in-person hybrid cloud events covering things like Server 2016, Microsoft Azure, the System Center Stack, the new releases, both on the 25th of February in Paddington, so hopefully in Microsoft's new offices, and of course on the 10th of March in York, so we have that north and south divide within England where we can hopefully have somewhere close to yourselves. And a new thing just to mention, we are about to start doing a new thing called the Power On Knowledge Sharing subscription, where any sort of events that we do, webinars, blog posts, we'll actually invite you to subscribe to a mailing list, and it's at zero cost charge. We'll actually keep you informed and up to date of what's going on, generally any new product updates, announcements, keeping your skill levels as fresh as they possibly can, and also running various things for people that subscribe, like giveaways of technical reference books, etc. So if there's any questions from anybody attending, if you'd like to either put a question in the conversation window, quite happy to answer it, or if you'd rather come off mute, please just put again a quick note in the conversation window and I'll bring you off mute and you can ask it yourself. If you don't have any questions and you generally want to disappear, then I thank you very much for attending. I hope you found this useful, and it leaves me nothing more than to say I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and enjoy the holidays.